everyone, it's Hannah and Kaylin back again with Double Talk. After a life spent living and breathing football, ex-NFL kicker Sean Conley suffered career-ending injuries from overtraining. He began practicing yoga as part of his rehabilitation and credited yoga's mindfulness, meditation, and philosophy to his new life direction. Now a yoga teacher himself, he and his wife own Amazing Yoga in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Listen into our conversation with Sean about his new book, The Point After: How One Resilient Kicker Learned There Was More to Life Than the NFL, and how he turned a heartbreaking experience into an opportunity to reinvent himself. I read an article that you wrote about your journey to the NFL, and you were in pain for years before you even reached that pro level, but you said that you were afraid to let on that you were injured. Where was that pressure coming from?
A lot of athletes have that same, I guess, challenge you could say that I had, and that is to conceal injuries. When I played college football at the University of Pittsburgh and then in the NFL, there's always that fear if you let your coach know that you have an injury that you could lose your position. And so like in college, yeah, it may not be your job, but like that's losing your starting position in college then could lead to not making it into the NFL. And so then when I was in the NFL and I always had injuries, there was a few instances where I wanted to go tell my coaches that I needed rest because I suffered from overuse because I was as a kicker. I train really hard. So unfortunately, that helped me get really good. But at the same time, I beat up my body sooner than I should have. And so I wanted to ask for rest a few times in my career, but I couldn't because I knew if I did that, then I would be basically like damaged goods. And then I would be let go from the team.
You write in your book about having a fear of failure back when you were playing football. How did having that rock bottom experience of being forced to pursue a different career and a different life from what you were so passionate about for all those years kind of force you to overcome that fear?
Yeah, it was difficult for me because at a very young age, actually from age 8 on, I always dreamed I dreamed of playing in the NFL. I always thought that's who I would be. So when my career ended well before I thought it would, I was just in my mid-20s. And unfortunately for me, and what a lot of athletes struggle with is I wasn't able to go out on my own terms. It was because of my injury, and the doctor said, like, your leg is shot basically. And so for me, it took a really long time to move beyond that because that's who I thought I was. Like that was, I was a professional football player. And so it took me some time to process that. And actually there was a few years where I essentially lived in this place of just like regret, thinking back, if I would have made this decision, if I had made this decision, things would have worked out like better for me. But luckily, as time went on, I realized it was probably the best thing that could happen to me because it eventually it led me to a different career path, and I'm able to now give back to others, from learning from my injuries.
One of the things that's so interesting about your story is that when you think of a football player and you think about somebody who practices yoga, they just seem so different from each other. Can you tell us about kind of your origin story of how you became a yogi?
I was probably one of the last people who I ever imagined who would get into yoga. I was playing this sport, which, you just talked about. It was very violent, very aggressive, very macho. When I was in the first couple of years of the NFL, my wife, she was like a yoga pioneer, and she's like, hey, you got to try this yoga. And this was like in the mid 90s before it was mainstream. So, NFL players like now, like Tom Brady does yoga, LeBron James does yoga, but back then, 20 years ago, like it was unheard of because it just, why would a high level athlete do something that's slow, that's passive, that's meditative? So I never did it while I was playing. It wasn't until my career was over for a few years where I realized like I couldn't even do basic things. Like if I went to a concert with my wife, I could only stand for about 10 minutes, and then my back would be so bad, my hips would be so bad that I have to go sit down. And, just getting up, waking up in the morning, it was hard even like to go to the bathroom because sometimes I'd wake up and my body couldn't move. And so it got to a point where I'm like, I should just try it. So I went and I tried yoga. Like my wife was a teacher, and I took a handful of classes, and I kept going and going. And then after a couple months, my back felt felt great to the point where I thought I could even do like an NFL comeback, but I wasn't going to do that, of course. Had been out of the game for too long. But what I discovered, not only did it help my body, but the biggest thing that it really helped me with was my mind. For a few years, I lived in this state of denial and regret about my football career not going the way I wanted it to, and like I looked at myself like as a failure because it didn't go the way I wanted to. But yoga really helped me with that, because the breathing exercises and just practicing being in the present moment. So these were things that I never really paid much attention to during my football career. It was always go, 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 push, push, push. And because the yoga helped me so much, that's when I got the bug, so to speak, and I wanted to share that with others and help them physically and maybe mentally, emotionally, with other things that they may be going on in their lives as well.
Any skills from your days of playing football that you can apply to yoga, or is there not much of a crossover?
Oh yeah, there's definitely crossover. I mean, the biggest thing that I learned from football is to be mindful with our bodies, and I suffered from, I guess you could say, body image issues, because when my career was over, like I would curse my body for not being able to do what it could do, and I wasn't grateful for it to being able to to be able to walk and so forth. And so I think with yoga, when we practice yoga, it's a good practice to just being grateful and just being in the present moment, and taking care of our bodies without turning it into something like a competition. And that was something that was difficult for me when I first got into yoga. I turned that into a competition like football. So I would try to push, I try to press through the poses, but then the more I practiced, I realized like that's what yoga was. What yoga wasn't about that. It was something where I could work on just healing my body and mind.
We've been taking yoga for just a couple months now, actually. We started during the pandemics, which is a crazy thing. But what I've learned is that it really does require practice. Like, it's not as easy as just sitting there and, even just being mindful and being able to meditate requires practice, because your mind is going to all these different places. Yeah. You have to kind of just stay in the present moment. As an instructor, how do you teach that?
Yeah, it's really hard because, a lot of us, when we first go to yoga, like whatever we may have going on in our lives, like let's say that we, for example, we're very competitive. So when we first do yoga, chances are we're going to look around the room, we're going to compare ourselves to other people, and that may even make us more competitive. But as yoga instructors, our job is pretty simple. It's just to remind people that it's not about how far you stretch in the poses, and just give them just like basic instruction for the poses, because the poses just paying attention like where your foot's at in a pose and your hips in a pose, that can also help people get present. So instead of thinking about what went on in their day at work or stress at home, they're thinking about what their body's doing in that moment. And so that's all I try to do, is just try to help people have this space where they can practice being present. And then I know if they spend even maybe 1/5 of the class being present, that's going to help them with whatever is going on in their lives.
It's a great time to be talking to you too, because the end of any year, as a New Year's resolution, it's always a great time to learn mindfulness, but especially at the end of 2020. What advice would you give to somebody who wants to learn how to be more mindful, not just in a yoga class, but in their everyday life?
There's so many different ways to practice mindfulness: yoga, meditation, even taking a walk. And I think, especially with right now, I think there's so many of us suffering from anxiety, and a good way to alleviate that is to work off some energy, or find something each day that you can do that is some sort of practice of mindfulness, whether it is yoga, meditation, if your gyms are closed, just going for a run, a walk in the woods, anything where you can just give your mind a break instead of it going. Because quite often, we go through these spouts where we're like, oh, I'm so tired. And quite often, I know it is for me, it's when my mind is super busy. But if I make time every day to do, whether it's yoga or just going to the park and walking for a while, it can help me have that headspace. And then I know that I'm more balanced each day.